In 1944, the world held its breath. For 4 long, brutal years, Hitler's fortress Europe had stood as an unyielding symbol of Nazi domination. An iron curtain that descended across the continent, and at its western edge lay a monumental testament to fear and concrete, the Atlantic Wall. This was no mere defensive line. It was a sprawling, jagged scar of steel and stone stretching thousands of miles, from the icy fjords of Norway down to the sun-baked border of Spain. Hitler had poured immense resources into its construction, envisioning an impenetrable barrier. It was a formidable network of massive concrete bunkers, their cannons aimed squarely at the English Channel. Between them lay a deadly tapestry of millions of landmines, treacherous underwater obstacles, and countless machine gun nests, all poised to unleash hell upon any would-be invader. The message was clear: Europe was closed. But just across the narrow, choppy waters of the Channel, a storm of a different kind was gathering. In the fields and harbours of southern England, the greatest invasion force in human history was secretly being assembled. The scale was almost unimaginable. 2 million men from a dozen allied nations, a city of soldiers, waited for the signal. Above them, a sky darkened by the wings of 11,000 aircraft fighters, bombers, and gliders stood ready. In the ports, an armada of 5,000 ships, from colossal battleships to humble landing craft, strained at their moorings. This was the coiled spring of liberation, ready to unleash its power. The question that haunted the German high command was not if the invasion would come, but where. Every sign, every piece of intelligence, and every instinct pointed to one logical place, the Pas-de-Calais. It was the shortest crossing, a mere 20 miles of water, offering the quickest route to the industrial heartland of Germany. The defense of this critical sector fell to one of the Third Reich's most capable and respected commanders, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. The Desert Fox, renowned for his tactical genius in North Africa, was now tasked with fortifying the coast, and he was certain Calais was the key. He worked relentlessly, strengthening the defences, believing that the first 24 hours of the invasion would be decisive. It was on this very certainty that the Allies built their masterpiece of misdirection, the most elaborate and audacious deception in the history of warfare, Operation Fortitude. Their goal was not just to confuse the enemy, but to actively convince them of a lie, to make them see what wasn't there. To achieve this, the Allies conjured an entire army out of thin air. This was the first US Army Group, or Fusilier Ghost Army, designed to haunt the German imagination. In the fields of Kent, directly opposite Pas-de-Calais, a phantom force took shape. Inflatable rubber tanks, complete with convincing tread marks pressed into the soil, were arranged in vast formations. Wooden aircraft and landing craft populated dummy airfields and harbours. At night, speakers blasted the sounds of construction and armoured divisions on the move, creating an auditory illusion of a massive military build-up. The deception was layered and meticulous. The Allies even generated fake radio traffic, an entire symphony of coded messages, casual chatter, and operational orders, all carefully crafted to be intercepted by German intelligence, painting a picture of an immense army preparing to strike at Calais. To complete the illusion, this ghost army needed a commander, a figure so feared and respected by the Germans that his presence alone would validate the threat. They chose the one man who fit the bill perfectly: General George S. Patton. The flamboyant, aggressive, and brilliant tank commander was the general the Germans dreaded most. His appointment to lead Fusag was the capstone of the entire deception. The Allies ensured that his movements were tracked, his headquarters monitored, and his name was repeatedly dropped by double agents feeding false information to Berlin. For Hitler and his generals, Patton's presence opposite Calais was the final, irrefutable proof. The bait was set, the fortress was watching a ghost, while the real storm prepared to break elsewhere. The date is set, June 5, 1944. Over 1.5 million soldiers, thousands of ships, and tens of thousands of aircraft are poised, ready to launch the largest amphibious invasion in human history. Operation Overlord. The liberation of Europe hangs in the balance. But there's a problem, a massive one. The English Channel, the very path to Normandy's beaches, is being ripped apart by a storm of epic proportions, the worst to hit in decades. The man who has to make the final call is the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The weight of the world is squarely on his shoulders. Think about that for a moment. All the planning, the years of preparation, the lives of countless young men, all of it comes down to one decision, made by one person. The pressure is unimaginable. The reports from the meteorologists are bleak. Winds are howling, rain is lashing down, and the waves in the channel are monstrous. They're tall enough to swamp the landing craft, sending thousands of men and their equipment to the bottom of the sea before they even see the enemy. Sending the invasion force into that tempest would be a massacre. It would be a catastrophic failure. So, the logical choice seems to be to delay, right? Postpone the invasion, wait for the weather to clear. But it's not that simple. Delaying is just as dangerous, if not more so. The entire operation relies on a delicate combination of factors. The tides have to be just right, low enough to expose the German beach obstacles, but rising to help push the landing craft ashore. The moon needs to be in a specific phase, providing enough light for the paratroopers who will be dropping behind enemy lines, but not so much that it makes the invasion fleet a sitting duck for German coastal batteries and aircraft. These perfect conditions of tide and moon only occur for a few days each month. If they miss this window in early June, the next opportunity won't be 4 weeks. And the biggest factor of all is secrecy. The Germans know an invasion is coming. They just don't know when or where. Every single day of delay is another chance for a German spy to discover the plan, for a reconnaissance flight to spot the massive buildup of ships in southern England, for the element of surprise to be completely lost. The entire Allied strategy is built on catching the Germans off guard at Normandy. Without surprise, the well-defended beaches could become a death trap, turning the tide of the war in Hitler's favor. So Eisenhower is trapped. Go now, and risk the entire invasion force being decimated by the storm. Or wait, and risk losing the element of surprise, potentially dooming the invasion to failure before it even begins. He spends the night of June 4th pacing, agonizing, chain-smoking. He meets with his top commanders, Montgomery, Ramsey, Lee Mallory. The opinions are divided. The tension is suffocating. Some argue that the risk is too great, that they must postpone. Others insist that the risk of discovery is even greater, that they must go, no matter the weather. At a final weather briefing in the early hours of June 5th, something incredible happens. Group Captain James Stagg, Eisenhower's chief meteorologist, finds a needle in the haystack. He identifies a tiny, fragile break in the storm, a small window of opportunity. He predicts a temporary lull in the wind and waves, just enough to get the ships across the channel and the men onto the beaches. It would last for maybe 24, 36 hours at most, starting on the morning of June 6th. But it's a gamble, a terrifying one. Meteorology in the 1940s was nowhere near as precise as it is today. Stagg is basing his forecast on limited data, on gut instinct as much as science. If he's wrong, the consequences are unthinkable. The lives of hundreds of thousands of men are hanging on his prediction. All eyes in the room turn to Eisenhower. He listens intently, polls his commanders one last time. The room is silent. You could hear a pin drop. He has to make the choice, and he has to make it now. For a moment, he is silent, the immense burden visible on his face. He has already drafted a press release in case of failure. It's in his pocket. It reads, "Our landings have failed, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." He's fully prepared to take sole responsibility for the greatest disaster in military history. After what feels like an eternity, he looks up. His mind is made. He gives the order that will change the course of the 20th century. In a quiet, steady voice, he says, "Okay, we'll go." Just 3 simple words. But in that moment, the fate of the free world is sealed. The massive gears of the invasion begin to turn. Convoys set sail into the choppy, uncertain waters of the English Channel. Paratroopers board their planes, ready to fly into the darkness over occupied France. D-Day is on. The decision was a monumental roll of the dice, a leap of faith based on a sliver of hope. And incredibly, James Stagg's forecast was correct. The weather cleared just enough. The invasion, though brutal and bloody, was a success. The Allies established their beachhead, and the long, hard road to Berlin had begun. But it all hinged on that one moment of agonizing decision, a moment when one man, Dwight D. Eisenhower, shouldered the weight of history and made the gut-wrenching choice to go. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest turning points in history come down to a single, difficult decision made under impossible pressure. The story of D-Day, the day that turned the tide of World War II, doesn't begin on the beaches. It doesn't start with the roar of landing craft or the desperate charge up the sand. No, the longest day begins in darkness. It begins with the quiet thrum of thousands of aircraft engines, cutting through the cold night air over the English Channel. Just after midnight on June 6, 1944, the invasion of Europe is set in motion. Inside hundreds of C-47 transport planes, more than 18,000 young men about to make a leap of faith into a black, hostile world. These are the elite, the American 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions, and the British 6th Airborne. Their faces are daubed in black paint, their bodies weighed down with nearly 100 pounds of gear rifles, ammunition, grenades, explosives, and for some, even a disassembled mortar. Their hearts are pounding, a mix of fear and adrenaline. Their mission is audacious, bordering on suicidal. They are to drop deep behind enemy lines, into the heart of German-occupied Normandy. Their job is not to fight a conventional battle, but to create absolute chaos. They must seize vital bridges over rivers and canals, capture strategic crossroads, destroy gun batteries, and disrupt German communication lines. In short, they are tasked with sealing off the invasion area, preventing German reinforcements from reaching the 5 landing beaches where, in just a few hours, the main amphibious assault will begin. The plan is meticulously detailed, the result of months of intelligence gathering and strategic planning. The British 6th Airborne, on the eastern flank, has a critical objective to capture 2 bridges, one over the Orne River and the other over the Caen Canal. These bridges, later codenamed Pegasus and Harsa, are the only eastern exit for the forces landing on Sword Beach. If the Germans destroy them, the British forces could be trapped. If the paratroopers fail to capture them, German panzer divisions could pour across and smash the invasion force. The success of the entire eastern flank of the invasion rests on the shoulders of just a few hundred men. On the western flank, the American paratroopers have an even larger, more complex task. The 101st Airborne, the famous Screaming Eagles, are to secure the causeways leading inland from Utah Beach, the area behind the beach intentionally flooded by the Germans, turning it into a treacherous marshland. The only way for the tanks, trucks, and tens of thousands of men landing at Utah to move inland is along a few narrow, elevated roads. The 101st must capture the exits to these causeways. Failure means the forces on Utah Beach would be pinned down, a perfect target for German artillery. Further west, the 82nd Airborne, the All-Americans, have the toughest job of all. They are to drop around the town of Saint-Mère-Église, a vital crossroads on the main north-south highway. Capturing this town would cut a major German reinforcement route. They also need to secure bridges over the Murderich River to protect the western flank of the entire Allied beachhead. It's a high-stakes gamble, dropping directly onto a defended town and a heavily fortified river line. But as the old military saying goes, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And for the airborne divisions, that contact comes sooner than expected. As the vast armada of transport planes crosses the French coast, they fly into a thick, low-lying cloud bank that wasn't in the forecast. At the same time, they are met with a storm of German anti-aircraft fire, the dreaded flak. The sky explodes in bursts of red and white. The planes, flying in tight formation, are forced to take evasive action. Pilots swerve and dive to avoid the deadly shrapnel. Formations break apart. In the confusion and the chaos of the night, many pilots get lost. The green light, the signal to jump, flashes at the wrong time for hundreds of men. What follows is a catastrophe. Men are dropped miles from their designated drop zones. Some land in the English Channel and drown under the weight of their gear. Others land directly in the flooded marshlands behind Omaha Beach, sinking into the dark water before they can even unbuckle their parachutes. Entire plane loads of paratroopers are scattered across the Norman countryside like seeds in the wind. Squads are separated, platoons are decimated, and companies cease to exist as cohesive units. In St. Miraglise, a house fire has drawn the townspeople and the German garrison into the main square. As they watch the firefighting efforts, they hear the drone of planes overhead. Suddenly, paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne begin to descend directly into the square. Illuminated by the flames, they are sitting ducks. One paratrooper, John Steele, gets his parachute caught on the church steeple, where he hangs helplessly 4 hours, pretending to be dead as the battle rages below him. From a purely military perspective, the airborne drop is a disaster. The meticulously laid plans have disintegrated. But from this chaos, an unexpected success begins to emerge. The sheer randomness of the drop has an unintended psychological effect on the German defenders. The German command structure is thrown into utter confusion. Reports start flooding in from all over the Cotentin Peninsula. Paratroopers are sighted here. Gunfire is heard there. A bridge is blown 5 miles away. A small group of Americans ambushes a German patrol 10 miles from that. There appears to be no pattern, no logic, no clear objective. To the German commanders, it seems as if the Allies have dropped tens of thousands of paratroopers everywhere. They can't discern the main effort. They don't know where to send their reserves. The chaos the paratroopers were meant to create is amplified 100 times over by their own disastrous drop. And in the darkness, small miracles begin to happen. Lost and alone, individual paratroopers and small, motley crews of men from different units band together. A lieutenant finds a sergeant and a few privates. They don't know where they are, but they know their mission. Using a simple clicker, a child's toy that makes a cricket sound, they identify friend from foe. 1 click is the challenge. 2 clicks is the response. Click-clack. In the dark fields and hedgerows of Normandy, this simple sound is a lifeline, a way to find comrades. These small bands of brothers, often led by a junior officer or a non-commissioned officer, take the initiative. They might not be able to take their primary objective, but they can still fight. They ambush German patrols, cut telephone wires, and attack supply depots. They become a phantom army, striking from the shadows, sowing fear and confusion, and tying down thousands of German troops who could otherwise be rushing to the beaches. Meanwhile, some objectives are achieved with stunning success. The British glider assault on Pegasus Bridge, a textbook operation. In a matter of minutes, the bridges are captured intact, a feat of incredible daring and precision. At the other end of the battlefield, scattered elements of the 101st and 82nd Airborne eventually find each other, regroup, and begin the bloody work of fighting for the causeways and crossroads. The battle for St. Miraglise rages through the night, but by dawn, the American flag is flying over the town hall, the first town in France to be liberated on D-Day. As the first rays of dawn break on the horizon, The scattered paratroopers look up, and they see it, a sight that makes all the terror of the night worthwhile. Filling the sky and stretching to the horizon is the Allied invasion fleet, nearly 7,000 ships. The main event is about to begin. The paratroopers, the Screaming Eagles, and the All-Americans have done their job. They held the line. They created the chaos. They paid a heavy price in blood. But they paved the way. The longest day has truly begun. June 6, 1944. The sky over Normandy is just beginning to blush with the first light of dawn. Inside the cold, damp concrete of the Atlantic Wall bunkers, German soldiers peer out through narrow slits. 4 months, they've been waiting, a mix of boredom and dread their constant companions. They've heard whispers, rumors of an invasion, but as days turned into weeks, the tension had slackened. Perhaps it was all a bluff, but this morning, something is different. The air feels heavy, charged with an unseen electricity. A young sentry, maybe no older than 18, rubs the sleep from his eyes and lifts his binoculars to the horizon. What he sees makes his blood run cold. He calls over his superior, his voice trembling. Others crowd around the viewing ports, their own binoculars rising in unison. A collective gasp ripples through the bunker. Out on the English Channel, where there should be nothing but grey water meeting a grey sky, there is something else entirely. It's not the sea. It's a wall, a forest of steel masts and dark holes, stretching from one end of the horizon to the other, so dense it blots out the dawn. It's an impossible sight, a city that has risen from the ocean overnight, ships of every conceivable size and shape bob on the waves, a ghostly armada that has appeared as if from a nightmare. There are hulking battleships, sleek cruisers, countless destroyers, and a swarm of landing craft that look like insects on the water. Panic begins to set in. Frantic calls are made up the chain of command. How could this happen? Where were the patrols? Where was the Luftwaffe? The sheer scale of it is incomprehensible. This isn't just an invasion force. It's a floating nation, come to reclaim a continent. The German soldiers, who had felt so secure behind their miles of concrete and steel, now feel utterly exposed, like ants before a tidal wave. They can see the flags whipping in the wind, the stars and stripes, the Union Jack, the flags of the Free French in Canada and Poland. This is not a raid. This is the real thing. This is the invasion they had been told was coming, but which no one truly believed could be this massive, this overwhelming. The numbers alone are staggering. Nearly 7,000 vessels in total. Among them, over 1,200 warships, including 6 battleships, and more than 20 cruisers. Packed aboard these ships are over 150,000 men, the first wave of an army that will eventually number in the millions. These men have been training 4 months, even years, for this single day. They are American, British, Canadian, Polish, French, Norwegian, and more, a united force with a singular, monumental purpose to breach Fortress Europe and begin the liberation of a continent. For them, this dawn represents hope, a chance to end years of brutal war. For the men in the bunkers, it represents the beginning of the end. As the sun climbs higher, the spectacle becomes even more terrifyingly clear. The silhouettes sharpen. The sheer industrial might of the Allied powers is laid bare on the waters of the Channel. It's a testament to years of secret planning, of industrial production on a scale never before seen, of a logistical ballet involving millions of people across a dozen countries. The operation, codenamed Neptune, is the naval component of the larger Operation Overlord. It is, to this day, the largest amphibious invasion in the history of warfare. The German defenders can do nothing but watch, their hearts pounding in their chests, a sickening sense of doom washing over them. Their formidable Atlantic Wall, Hitler's boasted impenetrable fortress, suddenly seems like a sandcastle about to be washed away by a relentless tide. The minutes tick by like hours. The silence is the worst part. The vast fleet just sits there, a silent, menacing presence on the horizon. The tension in the German bunkers is unbearable. Every man is gripping his weapon, his knuckles white. They know what's coming. They can feel it in their bones. The calm before the storm. And then, at precisely 5:50 a.m., the sea erupts. The silence is shattered by a deafening, world-ending roar. The naval bombardment begins, from the massive turrets of battleships like the USS Texas, the USS Arkansas, and HMS Warspite. Shells the size of small cars begin their fiery arc across the sky. Thousands of tons of high explosives are unleashed. The sky is torn apart by the thunder of the guns, a continuous, rolling concussion that shakes the very earth. The shells scream overhead, a sound that has been described as tearing fabric, before slamming into the coastline. The Atlantic Wall, which had seemed so strong just moments before, begins to crumble. Concrete bunkers are pulverized, gun emplacements are obliterated in colossal explosions of earth and shrapnel. The ground heaves and shakes as if in the grip of a violent earthquake. For the men inside the surviving bunkers, it is a descent into hell. The noise is indescribable, a physical force that batters the eardrums and rattles the teeth. The concrete walls around them vibrate violently. Dust and debris rain down from the ceilings, lights flicker and die. The air grows thick with cordite and pulverized stone, making it hard to breathe. Men are thrown from their feet by the concussions. Some are driven mad by the sheer, unending violence of the assault. They are trapped, blind, and utterly powerless, able to do nothing but cower and pray as their world is systematically destroyed around them. The bombardment is not just aimed at fortifications. It's a psychological weapon, designed to shatter the morale of the defenders before the first boot even touches the sand. This is the moment. The longest day, as it would come to be known, has truly begun. The naval shelling is just the overture to a symphony of destruction. As the big guns of the fleet pound the primary targets, cruisers and destroyers moving closer, their smaller, faster-firing guns targeting machine gun nests, trenches, and any sign of movement on the shore. Overhead, another sound joins the cacophony, the drone of thousands of aircraft. Bombers add their payload to the inferno, while fighters strafe the beaches, their cannons ripping up the sand. The entire coastline of Normandy is wreathed in smoke and fire. From the decks of the landing craft, Allied soldiers watch the spectacle with a mixture of awe and terror. They see the coastline disappear behind a curtain of explosions. The sheer power on display is reassuring, but they know that soon they will have to go ashore and face whatever is left. They check their weapons, say their prayers, and try to steady their nerves against the churning sea and the churning in their stomachs. Their moment is fast approaching. The naval bombardment will lift, the ramps will drop, and they will charge into that smoking chaos. Their mission, to secure a foothold on the shores of France, a foothold from which the liberation of Europe can be launched. The price for that foothold will be paid in blood on the sands of beaches Codenim Jutor, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The sea has risen, and with it, the tide of war is about to turn for good. June 6, 1944, dawn breaks over the stormy coast of Normandy. This isn't just another day, it's D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in human history is about to begin. The fate of the free world hangs precariously in the balance, resting on the shoulders of over 150,000 young men sailing toward a heavily fortified shore. Their mission, to breach Hitler's Atlantic Wall and open a second front in Europe. The Allied High Command has meticulously planned this operation, codenamed Overlord, 4 years. Every detail has been scrutinized, every contingency considered. But as the saying goes, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. The assault is divided across a 50-mile stretch of coastline, split into 5 sectors, each with a codename that would soon be seared into the annals of history: Sword, Juno, Gold, Utor, and Omaha, for the British and Canadian forces assigned to the eastern flank. The day begins with a brutal, chaotic fight. At Sword Beach, The British 3rd Infantry Division slams ashore. They face a maelstrom of machine gun fire, mortar, and artillery. The coastal town of Weerstrom is a fortress. Every house, every street corner is defended with bitter determination. But through sheer grit, they claw their way off the sand, pushing inland to link up with the paratroopers of the 6th Airborne Division, who had landed hours earlier in the dark to seize vital bridges. The fight is savage, the casualties high, but by the end of the day, they've established a fragile, yet vital, foothold. A few miles to the west, at Juno Beach, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division faces perhaps the roughest seas of the day. The choppy water swamps landing craft and throws the assault waves into disarray. When they finally hit the beach, they are met with a wall of lead from well-sighted German bunkers. The first wave of Canadians suffers staggering losses, in some companies over 50%, yet they refuse to be stopped. Rallying under fire, they exploit small gaps in the German defences, bypass strongpoints, and begin a relentless push inland. Their courage is extraordinary. By nightfall, the Canadians have advanced further than any other Allied force on D-Day, a testament to their incredible tenacity and fighting spirit against some of the fiercest resistance encountered. Next is Gold Beach, assigned to the British 50th Northumbrian Infantry Division. Here, the initial naval bombardment proves more effective. The specialised tanks of the 79th Armoured Division, affectionately known as Hobart's Funnies, play a crucial role. Flail tanks clear paths through minefields, while others armed with massive mortar demolish concrete fortifications. This armoured support helps the infantry break through the coastal crust of defences relatively quickly. They fight their way through fortified villages, securing key objectives, and moving towards the strategic city of Bayeux. While resistance stiffens as they move inland, the success at Gold Beach is vital, creating the central pillar of the Allied beachhead and beginning the process of linking the disparate landings into one continuous front. Moving to the American sectors, we arrive at the westernmost flank, Utah Beach. Here, fortune smiles on the Allies. The American 4th Infantry Division is scheduled to land opposite a heavily defended area, but strong coastal currents push their landing craft over a mile to the south, into a sector that is, by sheer luck, very lightly defended. The preliminary air bombardment has also been more successful here. Furthermore, the paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, despite being scattered across the countryside during their nighttime drop, have created chaos behind the lines, disrupting German communications and preventing reinforcements from reaching the coast. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the oldest man in the invasion and the only general to land in the first wave, famously declares, "We'll start the war from right here." Casualties at Utah are the lightest of all 5 beaches, and the troops quickly push off the sand to link up with the airborne, securing their objectives ahead of schedule. But between the successes at Utah and the hard-won gains at Gold, Juno, and Sword, lies a stretch of sand that is rapidly turning into a nightmare. This is Omaha Beach. Here, everything that could go wrong does go wrong. The pre-invasion naval and aerial bombardment has been a dismal failure. Heavy cloud cover caused the bombers to release their payloads too far inland, leaving the German defences completely untouched. These defences are manned not by second-rate troops, but by the battle-hardened veterans of the German 352nd Infantry Division, a unit the Allies didn't even know was there. They are dug in on the high bluffs overlooking the beach, with a perfect, interlocking field of fire covering every inch of the exposed sand. As the first wave of American soldiers from the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions approaches, the sea itself becomes an enemy. The tide is wrong, exposing deadly beach obstacles the engineers were supposed to clear. The amphibious DD swimming tanks, designed to provide crucial fire support, are launched too far out in the rough seas. Of the 32 tanks assigned to the first wave, 27 sink, taking their crews with them. The men in the landing craft are seasick exhausted and terrified. The moment the ramps drop, they are sorted. Machine guns, mortar, and artillery rain down upon them with terrifying accuracy. The beach becomes a kill zone. Men are cut down in the surf before they can even take a step on French soil. Landing craft are hit and explode. The survivors huddle behind the few obstacles on the beach, pinned down, leaderless, with bodies of their comrades washing around them in the red-tinged tide. The carefully laid plans have evaporated in a cloud of smoke and blood. The waves of follow-on troops arrive, only to find the same horrific scene. Adding to the chaos and the carnage, there is nowhere to go but forward into the teeth of the guns, or back into the sea. 4 hours, it seems the landing has failed. On the command ships offshore, generals contemplate the unthinkable, evacuating the beach and admitting defeat. D-Day, the Great Crusade, teeters on the brink of becoming the greatest military disaster in history. The entire invasion hangs by a thread held by the few thousand Americans trapped on that 2-mile stretch of hell. But then, something incredible happens. Out of the chaos, leaders emerge. Not just officers, but sergeants and corporals and privates. Men like Colonel George Taylor of the 16th Infantry Regiment, who bellows at his pinned-down soldiers. 2 kinds of people are staying on this beach, the dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here. Small groups, on their own initiative, begin to move. They crawl, inch by inch, across the deadly sand, up the shingle bank, and towards the bluffs. They use Bangalore torpedoes to blow gaps in the barbed wire. They climb the steep cliffs, helping one another up, under constant fire. They attack the German machine gun nests with rifles, grenades, and sheer, desperate courage. One by one, small breakthroughs are made. A pillbox is silenced here. A trench line is cleared there. Navy destroyers, seeing the desperate situation, sail dangerously close to the shore, risking running aground to provide direct fire support, blasting the German fortifications on the bluffs at point-blank range. Slowly, agonizingly, the tide begins to turn. It's not a grand, coordinated charge, but 1,000 tiny, individual acts of bravery. By midday, small groups of American soldiers have reached the top of the bluffs. By evening, a tenuous foothold has been secured. The cost is astronomical, with over 2,000 casualties, but they have done it. They have clawed their way off bloody Omaha. By the end of this longest of days, the Allies are ashore. The beachheads are not as deep or as secure as planned, and the 5 landing zones are not yet linked. The fighting ahead will be brutal as they battle their way through the dense hedgerows of the Normandy bocage. But the Atlantic Wall, Hitler's impregnable fortress, has been breached. The beginning of the end for the Third Reich had started on these beaches of blood. It was a victory forged in chaos and paid for with the lives of thousands. The events of D-Day, especially the near catastrophe at Omaha, serve as a stark and powerful reminder of the incredible sacrifice and valor that secured the freedoms we enjoy today. Picture this. It's the early morning of June 6, 1944. Thousands of Allied soldiers are storming the beaches of Normandy, wading through machine gun fire and artillery shells, fighting and dying in the cold waters of the English Channel. This is D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. The fate of the world hangs in the balance. But while chaos and courage reign on the beaches, a very different scene is unfolding on the German side. A scene of confusion, inaction, an almost unbelievable error. This is the story of how the German High Command was paralyzed on the most important day of the war. Our story starts not in a bunker in Normandy, but far away in Germany. Field Marshal Owen Rommel, the brilliant desert fox tasked with defending the French coast, is not at his post. He's at home, celebrating his wife Lucy's 50th birthday. He had looked at the weather reports for the English Channel, storms, high winds, and rough seas. He was convinced no sane commander would launch an invasion in such conditions. It was the perfect opportunity for a quick trip home to present his wife with a pair of Parisian shoes. He told his chief of staff, "I'm going to drive home. The weather is so bad. There can be no invasion." He left his headquarters confident that the coast was safe for at least a few days. Little did he know, he was leaving just as the invasion fleet was setting sail. Back in France, the German commanders on the ground are starting to receive frantic reports. Paratroopers are landing behind their lines. A massive fleet has been spotted off the coast. But the initial reaction is one of skepticism and confusion. Is this the real invasion? Or is it just a diversion, a feint to draw their forces away from the real target? This uncertainty was no accident. It was the result of one of the most brilliant deception campaigns in military history, Operation Fortitude. 4 months, the Allies had been feeding the Germans a steady diet of misinformation. They created a phantom army, the 1st US Army Group, or FUSAG, supposedly based in southeast England, poised to strike at the Pas de Calais. This fictional army was commanded by the one general the Germans feared most, George S. Patton. The Allies built fake airfields, inflatable tanks, and dummy landing craft. They generated massive amounts of fake radio traffic. The deception was so convincing, so detailed, that the German high command bought it completely. They believed Calais was the true target, and Normandy was just a sideshow. Even as reports of the massive Normandy landings poured in, many German generals clung to the belief that this was all a trick. They were waiting for Patton's real army to strike. This belief in the Calais deception had catastrophic consequences. The most powerful German forces in France, the elite panzer divisions, were held in reserve, positioned to counter the expected attack at Calais. They were the key to throwing the Allies back into the sea. If they could be unleashed on the Normandy beachheads in the first few hours, the invasion could have been a disaster. The local commanders in Normandy, like General Edgar Feuchtinger of the 21st Panzer Division, were begging for permission to attack. They could see the Allied fleet with their own eyes. They knew this was the real thing, but their hands were tied. The Panzer Divisions were under the direct control of Hitler's headquarters. And this brings us to the most critical era of all, unfolding in Berlin. Adolf Hitler is asleep. As the first reports from Normandy reached his headquarters at the Wolf's Lair, his generals knew they needed his permission to release the panzer reserves. General Alfred Jodl, chief of operations, was bombarded with desperate pleas from the front, but there was a problem. Hitler had given strict orders that he was not to be woken before his usual time. Around 9 or 10 a.m., his inner circle, protective and terrified of his famous temper, refused to disturb him. Imagine the scene: generals pacing nervously, phones ringing off the hook with news of a full-scale invasion, while the one man who could authorize a decisive counterattack is sleeping soundly. Jodl and others argued that the Führer must be woken, that every minute was critical. But Hitler's adjutants were adamant. The Führer needed his rest. He had been up late the previous night, so they waited. As the sun rose over Normandy, as men fought and died on Omaha and Utah beaches, the most powerful man in Germany slept. Hours ticked by, precious, irreplaceable hours. The German 21st Panzer Division, stationed near Cong, was one of the few armored units close enough to intervene quickly. Its commander, General Feuchtinger, finally decided to act on his own initiative around 6:30 a.m., moving his tanks toward the coast. But without a clear, unified command, his attack was piecemeal and uncoordinated. He was operating in a vacuum of information and orders. He ran into stiff resistance from British paratroopers who had landed during the night and secured key bridges. His division made some progress, but was ultimately fought to a standstill, unable to reach the beaches and create the havoc it was capable of. Meanwhile, back in Germany, Rommel is enjoying breakfast with his family when he finally gets the call. The invasion has begun. He's stunned. He immediately races back towards France, but it's a 10-hour drive. He is completely out of the picture for the most crucial part of the day, a commander-in-chief absent from his own battle. It's not until late in the morning, around 10 a.m., that Hitler is finally woken. He's presented with the news of the Normandy landings, but even then, there is no decisive action. Hitler, still completely convinced by Operation Fortitude, agrees with his intelligence officers that Normandy is likely a feint. He strolls into his daily military conference in the mid-afternoons, if it's just another day. He's reportedly in a good mood, almost gleeful. He believed the Allies had fallen into his trap. The news couldn't be better, he supposedly remarked. Now we have them where we can destroy them. But he still hesitated. He still held back the bulk of his panzer reserves, keeping them positioned near Calais, waiting for an attack that would never come. It wasn't until around 4 p.m. the afternoon, nearly 10 hours after the first landings, that Hitler finally authorized the release of the 12th SS Panzer Division and the Panzerlehr Division to move towards Normandy. But by then, it was far, far too late. In those critical 10 hours, the Allies had accomplished the impossible. They had secured a foothold, despite horrific casualties, especially on Omaha Beach. They were off the beaches and pushing inland. They had established air superiority over the battlefield, meaning any German tanks moving during the day would be relentlessly hounded by Allied fighter bombers. The journey for those panzer divisions, which should have been a short dash to the coast, became a slow, brutal crawl under constant air attack. They arrived too late, and in pieces, to mount a coordinated, decisive counterblow. The German command structure was a mess of overlapping authority and conflicting orders. Rommel's Army Group B was responsible for the coastal defense, but the panzer divisions were under the separate control of Panzer Group West, which answered directly to Hitler. This created a bureaucratic nightmare. Even when Hitler finally released the reserves, the orders had to go through a convoluted chain of command, causing further delays. There was no single commander on the ground with the authority to react swiftly and decisively. So, on the day the fate of Europe was being decided, the German response was a perfect storm of failure. A key commander was away celebrating a birthday. The High Command was blinded by a brilliant deception, and the Supreme Leader was asleep, his staff too afraid to wake him. By the time they finally woke up to the reality of the situation, the window of opportunity had slammed shut. The Allies were in Normandy to stay. The German confusion on D-Day wasn't just a series of mistakes. It was a fundamental breakdown of command that sealed the fate of the Third Reich. It's a powerful lesson in how warfare is not just about tanks and soldiers, but also about information, deception, and the critical importance of leadership in a crisis. The Normandy landings on June 6, 1944, represent one of the most audacious and complex military operations in history. Tens of thousands of Allied soldiers crossed the English Channel to assault Fortress Europe, a continent held in the iron grip of Nazi Germany. Their objective was to breach the Atlantic Wall, a formidable line of coastal defences that Adolf Hitler himself had declared impenetrable. The landings were spread across 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, while the fighting was fierce everywhere. It was on a 5-mile stretch of sand code-denimed Omaha that the fate of the entire invasion hung by a thread. For the American soldiers of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions, Omaha Beach was a scene of pure chaos and horror. The pre-invasion naval and aerial bombardments had largely missed their targets, leaving the German defences almost completely intact. As the landing craft doors dropped, the men were met with a storm of machine gun fire, mortar, and artillery shells. The beach, littered with obstacles designed to shred their boats and their bodies, offered no cover. Many were cut down before they even set foot on the sand. The initial waves were pinned down at the water's edge, unable to advance, their equipment lost to the unforgiving tide. The situation was so desperate that Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commanding from a ship offshore, seriously considered evacuating the beach and abandoning the landing. Yet, in the midst of this carnage, something incredible happened. It wasn't a grand, sweeping order from high command that turned the tide. It was the courage and initiative of individual men. A single general, Brigadier General Norman Cotter, waded ashore and famously rallied the terrified, leaderless soldiers with a simple, powerful cry: "Gentlemen, we are being killed on the beaches. Let's go inland and be killed." Another version of his words, equally inspiring, was, "We'll start the war from right here." His message was clear. Staying put was certain death. Moving forward was the only chance. Inspired by leaders like Cotter and driven by sheer survival instinct, small groups of soldiers began to act. They were no longer just units following orders. They were collections of men fighting for their lives and for the man next to them. Engineers, under relentless fire, crawled forward with explosives to blow gaps in the barbed wire and concrete obstacles. Behind them, riflemen and rangers began the slow, agonizing climb up the steep, muddy bluffs that overlooked the beach. Every foot gained was paid for in blood. They used craters for cover, pushing forward, taking out German machine gun nests one by one. It was a desperate, bloody, and piecemeal advance, but it was an advance nonetheless. By nightfall, the impossible had been achieved. Against all odds, the American soldiers had secured a small, fragile foothold on the high ground above Omaha. The longest day was finally over. The cost was staggering. Across all the landing beaches, the Allies suffered over 10,000 casualties, with more than 4,400 confirmed dead in just 24 hours. The sands of Normandy were forever stained with the sacrifice of a generation. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's invincible fortress, had been breached. The Western Front was now open. This victory, snatched from the jaws of defeat at Omaha, marked the beginning of the end. The liberation of France had begun, and the final, bloody march to Berlin was now inevitable. The foothold was secured. Thank you for watching. If you found this story of courage and sacrifice as moving as I do, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more chapters from history. We'll see you next time.